a sweet and beloved senior.
Margaret liked being out. She liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
Is viciously murdered in her own home.
Oh, my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it.
I actually thought I was going to get sick.
To be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific.
Police uncover a trail of suspects.
How would he know that information unless he was in the crime scene?
Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious.
It just wasn't adding up. He was not being honest and something else was going on.
Before a disturbing discovery.
He was just photographing her in her own home.
Points to a deranged killer nobody saw coming.
I don't think anyone in law enforcement could have had any inkling of the outcome of this case.
This is sick. This is not a normal murder.
This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Wadsworth, Ohio, a haven for families just outside Akron.
Wadsworth, a very quiet town. It's very community-oriented.
It's a great family community. It's very common for people not even to lock their doors because there's never a lot of crime that occurs right around in there.
On a Monday morning, April 9th, 2018, the peace is interrupted when police receive a call from a worried citizen.
Water Police.
Yes, this is Howard Leisure. My aunt lives on Portage Street. A friend of ours stopped over there yesterday to check on her, and she was nowhere to be found.
Okay.
He says papers were on the porch for the last 3 days.
What's her name?
Margaret Douglas.
Initially, the police department was contacted about Margaret being missing from her home.
We don't know where she's at. She's 98 years old.
Does she live there by herself?
She lives there by herself, yes. And she never locks her house.
So our initial response was to look for Margaret to see if she had fallen inside her home and needed help. Patrol officers walked through it, yelling for her to see if she would answer.
We continued to canvass the neighborhood, and we did not locate her.
If her close friends, she's not with them, something's wrong.
We contacted area hospitals and looked in any possible place that she could be.
Margaret was just basically missing.
That evening, Howard and his wife, Cindy, head to Margaret's home to help police with the search.
They asked if we could come down and meet them at the house.
Howard and Cindy started to look for some items common for Margaret to have taken with her when she left. There were specific shoes that she would wear. They were looking for a little red wallet that she carried her money and her credit cards in when she left the home.
So Howard went to look in that front closet.
The clothes had dropped or slipped down that was piled in the top of the closet.
He said, "Oh, I found her shoe." He tried to pull the shoe out.
And I touched it, and it felt cold and clammy.
The shoe was still attached to Margaret, who was in the closet.
And I thought, oh my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it. Something I'll never forget, I'm sorry. But to find her like that.
It was a terrible shock, especially for her nephew, Howard, and I just remember the look on his face.
I actually thought I was going to get sick. I think we were just so appalled and shocked that someone would kill her.
What motive could there be to kill a 98-year-old woman? What could she have done to anybody that would have resulted in that?
Margaret's home is declared a crime scene, and homicide detectives arrive.
Margaret was positioned with her head down in the corner and her backside kind of up in the air. Her underpants were torn inside the closet there. Her nightgown was all unsnapped, and her bra was pulled up. I immediately thought that there was a sexual element to the crime. There was a lot of trauma to Margaret's neck region. Somebody was able to strangle her, and my assumption was manually due to the lack of any ligature marks.
Looking at the condition of Margaret's body, rigor came and gone. You could look at the different lividity and the pulling of the blood inside the body to see it appeared she had been there for a few days.
As the forensics team gathers DNA and fingerprints, detectives search the house for further evidence.
Her wallet was not located, so that gave us an indication that maybe this was a burglary and they had made off with just the wallet. Margaret didn't always lock her doors, so we weren't surprised when we didn't find forced entry into her home.
Investigators find their first clue outside the home.
I observed a plastic food service glove on the back side of the house and collected the glove just in case that it was involved.
There was not a lot of physical evidence at the crime scene. Besides the glove, the missing wallet was something, but nothing that would direct us in a certain way.
Who would attack and kill a 98-year-old woman in her own home? As they set out for answers, detectives turn to Howard and Cindy to learn more about Margaret.
The best thing to do is to get to know your victim as best you can.
Born in Akron, Ohio in 1919, Margaret was known as a woman of strong character with a fiercely independent streak.
She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted to get.
Margaret often told us about her days working at the O'Neill's in downtown Akron. She liked being out, she liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
Margaret had very strong opinions, and she was certainly not afraid to tell you what her opinion was.
She was a pretty independent woman, let's put it that way.
After World War II, Margaret married the love of her life, Army veteran Donald Douglas.
If I saw Margaret, I saw Donald, her husband. They were made for each other. They just complemented each other.
The couple moved into the house that Margaret would live in for the rest of her life.
I think Margaret might have lived in that neighborhood close to 70 years.
It was Margaret and Donald's choice not to have any children, and they seemed extremely happy together.
They liked to travel together. They went to ball games. They enjoyed going to the Indians game.
When Donald passed away in the year 2000, Margaret chose to remain in her house, surrounded by friends and caring neighbors.
Margaret was a pretty good friend with the neighbors, David and his wife.
There was another neighbor across the street. Her name was Jan. They just sort of kept an eye on Margaret.
She knew all the kids in the neighborhood, but as she got older, she's got more restricted to the house. And that's when me and my wife stepped in at that point and started taking her shopping and doing things for her as needed.
Margaret loved the fact that she was 98 years old, and she wanted to be 100. She truly loved life.
For someone to have lived such a wonderful, vibrant life, only to be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific. I have a grandmother that's similar in age. It's just very hit close to home.
The investigators were under a tremendous amount of pressure. Every one of them took it very personally, and I think every one of them wanted to find justice very quickly for the family.
At the onset, we had no clue. There was no direction.
Maybe it's financial. Maybe it was a relationship issue. Maybe it was an argument that went too far and something happened that they didn't expect. But at that stage in the investigation, you just don't know.
We need to start somewhere, so we start closest to her.
So that would include looking at Howard and Cindy.
We definitely leave everyone on the list until we can exclusively rule them out and have that be a certainty and not just a feeling.
Coming up, is Margaret's killer hiding in plain sight?
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found.
He's come back to the scene of a crime.
Detectives unearth dark secrets.
We found a journal about a desire to kill people.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
Leading to a killer no one saw coming.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Police are investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, whose body was discovered stuffed in a closet in her own home.
I just can't imagine a 98-year-old woman being that terrified and not knowing what to do. It's definitely one of the most traumatic things I've ever had to experience in my years with the Wadsworth Police Department.
Detectives begin by interviewing those closest to Margaret, her nephew Howard and his wife Cindy.
We fingerprint and get DNA from Cindy and Howard to show whether their fingerprints or DNA were on something that it should not have been on. We did subpoenas for phone records and also location data, GPS data, so we could tell their whereabouts during the time in question. Cindy and Howard lived approximately 30 or 40-minute drive away, but they would come into town a couple times a month to do her grocery shopping.
She always paid with cash. We swung down, went to the bank, she threw $200 out to go shopping with.
Police ask Howard about Margaret's finances. Was there anyone who stood to gain from her death?
Margaret was really in charge of her own finances. We did look into those accounts and check for activity. We were never able to locate any activity that was out of the normal.
Does she have a power of attorney or a will or anything like that?
No. We've been telling her she needs a will, she needs this. She would never take the time to do it.
There was nobody that we could find that would have any financial gain from her death.
Could Howard or Cindy think of anyone who might wish to harm Margaret?
Any problems with her? Did she want to argue with people or anything like that? Nothing?
No, sweet old lady.
And nobody else, she didn't, have any problems with anybody that... Not that I know of. She was... Margaret often milk. That's why it's so just horrible.
Detectives ask about others in close contact with Margaret. According to Howard and Cindy, the closest is Margaret's former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard.
Cindy and Howard did keep in contact with David, who was Margaret's main caregiver. David would come and check on her a couple of times a week just to see if she was okay and if she needed anything.
David has the most contact with her.
Yeah, he'd go every week, take her trash out, and then he'd take the can back in the next day. So.
After interviewing Howard and Cindy, detectives try to contact David, but he's not answering their calls.
There was some concern not being able to reach David, and that was troubling. We didn't have any other suspects. It made us wonder what was going on.
As detectives try to track David down, patrol officers continue to canvass Margaret's neighbors for information.
During the canvass, we did learn that there had been some vehicles in the neighborhood that had been rifled through, and small items were taken out, like change and things like that.
Is this somebody that was up by Margaret's house and found a crime of opportunity because it's somebody that they can maybe figure out lives alone?
As the canvass continues, officers notice someone watching the activity around Margaret's house.
I noticed a man outside smoking a cigarette, so I went out to make contact with him. This person ended up being David Klinkenbeard. He said that he used to live next door to Margaret. He kind of wanted to know what was going on.
He said he was essentially canvassing the neighborhood looking for anything that was suspicious.
David did strike me as odd at first. It was concerning to me that he was standing out there trying to determine what exactly we had found.
As David continues to talk, police grow increasingly suspicious.
He was kind of making comments about information that seemed strange that he would know about.
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found. Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious. You don't know where someone has gotten their information. Were they there? Were they involved in the murder?
With a growing list of questions about David, officers approach Margaret's neighbors for answers.
One of the neighbors had mentioned how they had seen David driving through the neighborhood, but didn't stop, just kind of drove through. So they thought that was kind of strange. Maybe he's come back to the scene of a crime, whether he's driving back by because he knows what he did and he's having remorse, or maybe trying to get back inside there to get her body out of there and get rid of it, or to look to see if he left anything behind.
David told some of the neighbors that his fingerprints would be all over the house and he would have to get his fingerprints taken, which is not something that people usually say or think.
The next day, David's appearance in local news coverage of the murder raises further alarm bells.
I turned on the news and there he is on TV, talking to the reporters, putting himself out there.
Was this a guilty man's ploy to hide in plain sight?
That seemed out of sorts to us. Generally, when people are grieving a loss, their instinct is not to cooperate with the media, but David seemed very willing to speak with them.
All of these things added together are possible indicators of someone who is purposely trying to insert themselves in the investigation because they're involved in this investigation.
Could David have possibly been involved in Margaret's murder?
At that point, we had some questions about his actions and his knowledge of how Margaret was found.
He definitely became a main point of interest.
On April 11th, 2 days after finding Margaret's body in her own home, police bring her former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard, in for questioning.
David told us that he last saw Margaret when he was helping her with her trash can on Wednesday.
You didn't come by on Thursday or Friday, not Sunday?
No, not till Sunday.
On Sunday, he had gone over to the house and he didn't locate her. He had some concerns that maybe she was upstairs in a state of undress and he didn't want to go up there himself. So he contacted Jan across the street.
And that's when you had Jan come over in case she was upstairs and
Yeah,
not decent.
yeah. Jan went up there, she wasn't up there, and then we looked in the closet up there.
Okay, your friend's missing. That'd be the last thing in your mind, whether they're dressed or not. You would go and look for them throughout the entire house, not go get somebody else.
As the interview continues, David's answers only raise further suspicion.
She likes to look nice, and she was a pretty woman.
Yeah.
When she was younger, she was a redhead.
Oh.
Yeah. And she was really, coming back in, she was really kind of, not thin then, but, you know, I was surprised how good she looked back then.
Some of the comments that he made about Margaret, in particular her physical appearance when she was younger, she had just been murdered, and here he is describing her figure and her body type in an interview.
The detective asked David about the calls he made when he couldn't find Margaret.
Oh, I want to use my cell phone to call Howard. I got his number on my phone.
Do you have your phone with you?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I had my computer guy just go through and write down the dates of your calls?
I have.
He said he must have left it at home and didn't have it on his person.
It seems strange because, you know, in this day and age, nobody goes anywhere without their cell phone. Their cell phone is always on them.
Investigators must now subpoena David's cell phone records. At the same time, they receive a forensics report from the crime scene.
DNA belonging to Margaret was found on the glove that was discovered outside of Margaret's house.
We believe that the suspect's DNA was on the inside of the glove.
Would you mind if I was able to get a sample of your DNA? We know you're supposed to be in the house. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Detectives send David's DNA to compare against that found inside the glove. While they wait for the results, they check David's cell phone data to verify his alibi.
We were able to go through his day-to-day life and see that he likely was not involved, but there was no concrete evidence that we were able to bring to light.
Unlike the phone records, the DNA findings are conclusive. David is not Margaret's killer.
David ended up being, in the end of all this thing, just a friend of hers that was not involved at all.
Sometimes he would say things that didn't really have an explanation. It just took the time and the effort to understand his involvement, and there was reasonable explanation for all of the things that we had concerns about. He just really cared about Margaret and really had concern that he would have an answer as to what happened.
We had to look at David as probably our #1 interest because obviously his strange comments in the beginning about his DNA and fingerprints, plus he's the one that saw her on a regular basis.
Up until that point where you reach a crossroads, you really do have to look at every tiny detail, every possibility.
Detectives turn their attention to the autopsy report, which paints a terrifying picture of Margaret's last moments.
The medical examiner's report on Margaret showed what kind of force was used to kill her in the end. She had contusions to her head, to her face. She had a fracture to her orbital socket. She had a fracture to her C7 vertebrae in her neck. It showed there was a compression there, which broke her neck.
Margaret was not a frail woman. Not just anyone would be able to manually strangle her.
While the autopsy finds no direct evidence of sexual assault, officers continue to suspect otherwise.
Why would her underwear be ripped off of her? They weren't like pulled off, they were torn.
There were other bodily fluids that were mixed in with the swabs from Margaret's body.
The fact that someone took Margaret in such a horrific manner was a very difficult thing to handle.
As homicide detectives regroup to search for new leads, patrol officers alert them to an unusual crime reported in the early morning hours of April 8th, the day before Margaret's body is discovered.
There was a report of a carjacking very near the scene of Margaret Douglas's home. In a community like Wadsworth, we don't have carjackings. That's not a normal call for us.
They happened in such time close to one another that we had to wonder if they were related.
The carjacking victim is a local man named Paul Shalott.
Paul had reported he was driving along and he happened to notice a 19, 20-year-old man limping, like having trouble walking up the street.
Paul had reported to us that he was just being a good Samaritan and picking somebody up that he thought to be injured.
So as he went out to help him, he said the gentleman just slid into the driver's seat and then locked the doors, wouldn't let him in, and took off with his car.
Officers grow suspicious when they quickly locate Paul's car near the site of the carjacking.
The car was found very quickly, and it was found right there in the same area it was taken.
Literally, like, not even a block away from where he had picked this gentleman up, supposedly, and lost his car.
This happened at a building that had cameras on the outside, so we wanted to kind of investigate Paul's story because it just didn't seem quite right. You could see on the video that Paul had been with what appeared to be a young man. The young man was not limping. He did not seem to be injured in any way.
Paul's initial report did not match anything that video said. It just wasn't adding up. He was not being honest and something else was going on.
Why had Paul lied to police? And who was the young man seen in security footage? Had one of them gone on to do something unthinkable?
We had the carjacking, and then we had Mark's disappearance. It just started making me think a little bit, could this be the guy that could be involved?
Police investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have a potential new lead after learning of an alleged carjacking in her quiet neighborhood.
Somebody that's willing to perpetrate a crime such as a carjacking makes you really wonder, is this related to a murder that's just happened a couple blocks away?
But when security video proves the victim, Paul Shalott, has lied to police, detectives demand answers.
When I interviewed Paul to get the whole story, he was very nervous. And then he finally started telling us the truth about how he came to be in that area and what really happened. He was on an app trying to meet somebody, and he did come across somebody. He said he worked for a church, and he didn't want them to find out that he's using a site to try to meet up with young men. He didn't want to admit it right away, but they started getting involved sexually in the car. The male subject he picked up, I guess, started getting upset that things weren't going his way.
The young man that he met up with just kind of snapped and took the car, not what Paul had expected when he met this person online.
With Paul finally being honest, detectives change course and ask if he knows anything about the murder of Margaret Douglas.
He was aware of what had happened and that she was a victim of a homicide. But Paul did not know Margaret at all.
He had no ties to her, and real no ties even in that neighborhood. He was just there basically to meet up with somebody that night. Then I started thinking, well, now we need to know who was driving that car, who carjacked him.
Paul was asked for the account information for the app that he used to meet this person on.
He said he couldn't remember the email he used or the password he used to get in there.
Paul was embarrassed about what he had let happen and the fact that he was involved with a young man. He had deleted everything from his phone that was relative to that. We weren't able to recover any of that information.
So we had no way of proving or figuring out who it was that he may have met up with that night.
After hitting another dead lead, frustrated investigators know that public fear is only growing.
There was definitely some fear. There were people that would normally stroll down the street, walk their dogs, let their kids play outside unsupervised, and things like that weren't happening after Margaret's discovery.
And the emotions for everybody were really high and heightened. They're all locking their doors now, and they're really watching for everything. So it was definitely a shock to all of them.
With the community on edge, Margaret's family continues to struggle with their loss.
The hardest part going through all this is the time-consuming and the worrying and waiting for the outcome. And you're not sure what's going to happen.
That was hard. You know, none of us are patient. And we all want to know what happened here, why someone would do this.
The reason you're doing what you're doing is for the victim. You want somebody to be held responsible for what they've done.
Believing that the carjacker may be a serial criminal, police take a closer look at the petty crimes reported around Margaret's neighborhood.
The crimes all took place in just a few block area.
Is there somebody in this neighborhood that's committing a whole bunch of crimes for some reason, because we weren't seeing those crimes spreading out throughout the city like we typically would?
You have to wonder if the person who's committing these petty crimes has escalated to commit something more horrific.
On the night of April 13th, 4 days after the discovery of Margaret's body, police received several calls about 2 young men.
We had received a lot of different calls where people had seen 2 male subjects running around, creating mischief, doing things at the park, doing things at the church, and in cars.
A couple of young males were taking some type of device that had wheels on the bottom and hanging out in one of the parking lots.
That same night, police respond to a call that changes everything.
It was reported to us that there had been a break-in to a trailer that was at a construction site.
When officers investigate, they get a huge break.
Someone had left their cell phone behind at the trailer.
Does the phone belong to the person responsible for the neighborhood crime spree, including Margaret's murder? Investigators used forensic software to unlock the phone.
The phone came back to a subject that we had been known in our area for different car break-ins and little thefts from cars that happened in our city, and especially over in that area.
He was identified by one of our officers as Zach Thronson. Zach was known to us, and he did have a troubled past. He had been in some more serious trouble, and we were all familiar with him. At this point, we thought that we really needed to bring Zach in and talk to him about what he had been doing that night. Zach was found sleeping in his car at the high school in the parking lot.
As officers bring Zach into the station for an interview, something immediately catches their attention.
Zach had some scratches on his legs, which made me wonder where those came from.
Are they defensive wounds from somebody fighting back against you and scratching you that way? Could they be from something simple, explainable, or evidence into what we were looking into with regards to Margaret Douglas?
Police investigating the murder of Margaret Douglas have connected local teen Zach Thronson to a spate of crimes near her home.
With the carjacking, we know there was supposed to be a young male. Now we have Zach running around, committing these little crimes, all within the same area around the same time frame.
His phone was left behind at the trailer, so we knew for sure that he was involved in the crimes that were all seemingly tied together.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Zach if he killed Margaret Douglas.
Zach, he owned up for the little things he did, but he denied any knowledge of it or being involved at all.
Detectives steer the interview to the identity of the teen seen with Zach in security footage.
He said that he was out with his friend Gavin Ramsey, and that everything that had happened was all Gavin's idea. Gavin had been the one that was trying to break into the trailer, and that he was just standing by and watching it happen, just a presence during the time that Gavin was committing all the other petty crimes. Zach was definitely distancing himself, so there was some concern that he wasn't being honest about everything that they had done.
For the moment, police decide not to charge Zach until they interview his friend, Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin had been in trouble before, and his mom had dealt with that. She was going to hold him accountable for the things he had done. We talked about the trailer, and I just let him know that we knew he was there because Zach had told us that he was there. Property-type crimes and less serious crimes is what we talked about at first.
That's just to see, is he going to own up to that? And then we'd continue from there into something more serious.
You guys didn't take anything? Did you rummage through glove boxes or anything?
Maybe like 50 times, but other than that, seriously nothing.
He admitted to all of them. He would rifle through cars and take things that weren't of a lot of value, just to take things.
Gavin told us during the interview, he does it for a rush, so it wasn't about money or anything.
I think the reason that he was so willing to admit to these lesser offenses is to kind of distance himself and clear his name from anything else I might want to talk to him about.
Now, detectives turn their questions to more serious crimes.
We had a carjacking.
Oh my God.
And the suspect is a young white male with a nice complexion and blue eyes. Is that you?
Gavin's demeanor changed substantially when I started to ask him about the carjacking.
What's upsetting you so much? Is there something else you need to tell us?
You've already gotten yourself in trouble, so.
I know, and I don't need I don't know what to say.
Before answering further questions, Gavin asks to speak with a detective alone.
I don't know, can you two actually leave for a second?
What's that?
Can you two actually leave? So I can talk to her?
Yeah.
Sure.
So when his mom stepped out,
the carjacking, it was me, I'm gonna be honest about it, but the way that he explained it, that guy, that's not right.
he openly admitted that he was the one who did the carjacking, but he didn't really want to talk about the sexual part of what happened in there.
You guys didn't talk about what kind of sex you were gonna have, or?
No, I don't know, it's not something I'm interested in, just the act of him getting the payback, I guess, I don't know, that's, like, it's karma, really. Like, if you're gonna do that, then I'm gonna rob you.
Gavin denies that he was truly interested in meeting up with Paul for any reason other than to catfish him or to teach him a lesson.
This is a kid that's admitting to going around breaking into cars, and it's not for theft, it's for a rush, so we know he's after the adrenaline. What else could he have possibly done?
With Gavin admitting to the carjacking, the interview turns to questions about Margaret Douglas.
I specifically asked him if he had murdered Margaret, and he denied it.
There's no reason that we would find your DNA inside her house, because we swabbed the hell out of that house.
You shouldn't.
I mean, if you've never been in there, then obviously we wouldn't. But, I mean, you name it. We swabbed it, we took it. I'm sure you know we were there all night.
Yeah.
He was hiding something. There was more to be said. I didn't feel that this avenue had been exhausted with him. This was something that we probably needed to revisit, maybe from another direction.
For now, detectives allow Gavin to leave with his mother.
At this point, we have nothing other than the petty crimes, which are handled through juvenile court, so we wouldn't actually take him into custody to hold him.
But they have one request for Gavin's mother.
I let her know that we had concerns and that I would like to look at his phone. I was expecting to find information about how maybe Gavin was victimized.
Instead, what officers find on Gavin's phone changes everything.
Officer Cooper discovered Google-type searches, murder in Wadsworth, Margaret Douglas investigation, Wadsworth PD reports on homicide investigation.
Then, detectives find something they never would have imagined.
There were actually photos and videos of Margaret Douglas.
Timestamps show that the images were recorded in the early morning hours of Friday, April 6th.
She obviously didn't know he was there, and he was just photographing her from a vantage point in her own home. There was clearly a point in time where she realized that someone was in her home and was startled.
Nothing can prepare investigators for what they see next.
I was absolutely shocked that a child could imagine doing this to another human being. This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Detectives investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have found disturbing evidence on a phone belonging to 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey.
The first thought in my mind was, he knows we're going to discover this. And I could just imagine him fleeing.
Police moved quickly to take Gavin into custody.
Once we picked him up, I briefly told his mom that we had discovered evidence on his phone and that we were going to take him back to the police department. It was definitely not the easiest interview that I had ever done.
I came up onto the porch, and I didn't even know what I was going to do. I don't know, I felt like going into the house is like the biggest adrenaline rush I could get. So then I tried the doorknob, and that just happened to be unlocked.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
So how long do you think you were in the house before you woke her up?
I don't know, probably like 10, 15 minutes.
You could see in some of the photos the obvious horror on her face as to what was happening.
And then from the time you woke her up to the time you ended up on top of her, choking her, how long did that whole part take?
That was probably like 5 minutes.
He had used both hands to squeeze her neck and push her neck back against the floor, strangling her. He said that once he realized the gravity of what he was doing, it was too late, that she was already gone.
For officers, the most disturbing questions involve what Gavin did after killing Margaret.
When I saw him, it was just like, this is sick. This is not a normal murder.
The sexual nature of his actions was kind of a topic that he was not willing to talk about.
He degraded her by using her for sexual things and videotaping and taking pictures. He'd actually been in there with her for a while.
And then I checked my phone, and it said it was like 4 something, and I knew my mom had to get up at 5 for work.
So he takes the body, finds the closet, because he has to get home. He throws in there to hide her because I don't want anybody to find her. I don't want anybody to know it's me.
But was Margaret simply a random victim of Gavin's need for a rush? Or had he known her better than he'd initially let on?
Gavin lived very close to Margaret Douglas, right around the corner from her house.
Gavin had actually been to her house before, asking her about maybe cutting her grass, raking leaves, or even, shoveling snow. He was out looking for little odd jobs around the neighborhood.
The thought in the back of my mind was that Gavin had observed Margaret regularly and actually thought about the things that he would like to do and that she would make a good victim.
Police arrest Gavin Ramsey for the murder of Margaret Douglas and get a search warrant for his bedroom.
We found gloves, matching the same style and type of glove that was found at the scene.
In one of his drawers, I discovered Margaret's red wallet.
Detectives then make an even more disturbing find.
We also found a journal that had some writings about fantasies about murder. He had written almost like a book report on different serial killers. After reading those, there was no doubt in my mind that Gavin would kill again if he had the opportunity. This is something that he enjoys, that he finds pleasure in.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Because of the heinous nature of the crime, the juvenile penal system is not equipped to deal with an individual such as Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin was ultimately charged as an adult with aggravated murder, 2 other counts of murder, burglary, and abuse of a corpse.
We requested that Mr. Ramsey receive the harshest penalty that the law would allow.
Found guilty on all charges, Gavin is sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Margaret Douglas.
When I watched Gavin Ramsey at the sentencing, I still felt in my mind that he doesn't understand the gravity of what he's done. There's still no remorse there.
You would like to think that the world is full of people like you and I, and don't want to think that of such a young person able to act out something that you would only see in a horror movie.
I was shocked to find out that it was a young person who was still in high school that would do something like this.
To murder somebody who's 98 years old, to think you could shove a body in that closet. I just, that part, I just can't even.
It absolutely made me think of my own grandma. I just could not imagine her living such a wonderful life and having it end in such a horrific way.
Despite the horror of Margaret's death, her family honors her memory by thinking of her remarkable life.
Margaret gave you an inspiration that you can still be 98 years old and be very functional, live in your own home, take care of yourself. She, to me, was just an inspiration.
She led a full life and could have been longer.
One by one, prostitutes die across Central Europe. Austrian authorities believe one man is responsible. But they have no experience hunting serial killers. They turn to an FBI profiler for help. He finds the same killer has come to America, and the death count keeps rising until the FBI stops him.
Beginning in 1990, Europe found itself in the clutches of a serial killer. He became an international outlaw, hopping from country to country to evade capture and to kill again. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Legal cooperation between countries and continents is not common, but neither are serial killers in Europe. Desperate to apprehend him, Austrian authorities called on the FBI for help.
In Austria, the exchange of sex for money has been legal for years. Here, prostitutes walk the streets for men willing to pay for their services. Throughout most of the 1980s, Heide Marie Hammerer worked in the city of Bregenz as a prostitute. A licensed professional for almost 10 years. She was used to unusual requests. But on the night of December 5th, 1990, a customer went too far. The killer hurriedly redressed his victim. Then he dragged her through a secluded forest some 10 miles away and left her body. The crime went undiscovered for 3 weeks. On the morning of New Year's Eve, 1990, a pair of hikers stumbled upon Hammerer's body. Though the body had been left exposed to the elements, the winter temperatures helped preserve the remains. Austrian authorities determined that Hammerer had been strangled with her own pantyhose. Her wrists were bruised from restraints. At the autopsy, they found no sexual discharge on her body. But they did find fibers that were inconsistent with her clothing. She was only the first victim. Over the next several months, 3 more prostitutes died violently throughout Austria. Brunhilde Masser was recovered in a stream bed near Graz. Elfriede Schrempf, also from Graz, was found nearby in the woods. Near Vienna, Sylvia Zagler was discovered in a stand of trees. The women had all been bruised, strangled with their pantyhose, and left in various states of undress, lying face down in wooded areas. The Austrian public was shocked. On April 4th, 1991, the authorities gathered their most experienced investigators to focus on the slayings. Because of the similarities in the 4 cases, investigators reasoned that one person was responsible. Austria had its first serial killer in modern history. They had no experience investigating these offenders. Dr. Ernst Geiger, one of Austria's leading detectives, was assigned to coordinate the hunt.
No lead was promising. All the leads ended nowhere. We had no real suspect.
The first break came when a retired policeman read of the murders in a Salzburg newspaper. They reminded him of a case he solved in 1974. Detective Geiger received a phone call from the retired officer. 15 years earlier, he told Geiger, a young woman had been strangled with one of her undergarments and dumped in the woods. Just like the present victims. The killer was caught and convicted, but had recently been paroled. Detective Geiger took the name of the ex-convict, Johann Jack Unterweger.
Jack Unterweger was paroled after 15 years because he had murdered a young girl before, and while he was in prison, he became a writer, quite a famous writer.
But was it possible that this famous writer could be a serial killer? Geiger and his team began looking into the journalist's background. Until 1990, Jack Unterweger had led a difficult life. He was born to a German prostitute who quickly abandoned him. He suffered neglect and abuse, shuttling between various foster situations. As a teenager, Jack began to play out the rage of his dismal childhood. By age 25, that fury earned Unterweger a life sentence. Unterweger continued his education and started writing while in prison. He published letters, plays, short stories, and an autobiography. In the book that became a bestseller, Unterweger painted a tragic tale of himself as victim. Critics and the public alike embraced the author for the apparent honesty with which he confronted his past. The literary community suggested that art had redeemed him. Eventually, the press and the public at large demanded that his life sentence be commuted. On May 12, 1990, Austrian authorities agreed. The 40-year-old Austrian walked out of prison. He was a free man, determined never to spend another minute of his life behind bars. Shortly after his release, he was hired by a major German magazine to cover the prostitute murders. He promised to use his writing in a socially conscious way. He told his editor that he wanted to give voice to the dispossessed, caught in the underbelly of society, as he once was. By July 1991, after 2 more prostitutes were found strangled, psychologist Tom Mueller of Austria's Criminal Investigation Division joined the team.
When we started the investigation against Jack Unterweger, it was pretty hard because all his friends were within the media and they couldn't understand that he could be the bad guy.
Even among investigators, only a handful considered this celebrity journalist a possible suspect. Through receipts and travel records, Geiger and Mueller learned that Unterweger had been at each murder location. This was not suspicious in itself, since he was covering the story as an investigative journalist. Yet he always reached those destinations before the murders took place. Investigators also discovered that Unterweger had visited Prague in September 1990. Just before a Czechoslovakian woman, Blanka Bokova, was strangled with her pantyhose. She was the earliest victim in the string of murders that now totaled 7.
And what was outstanding for us, that exactly at any time where Czech hang out at any place in Prague, in the western part of Austria, in the southern part of Austria, exactly in that time period there was always a dead body somewhere in the woods.
In Austria, another woman, Regina Prem, had been missing for months and presumed dead. Her family waited desperately for news of her fate. In October of 1991, the grief-stricken husband and son received a chilling phone call to their unlisted number. The caller told him that he was Regina's killer and described what she was wearing the night she disappeared. The caller claimed that he was the executioner, that God ordered him to do it, that she was left lying on the place of sacrifice with her face turned towards hell. The phone call was cruel torture to an already traumatized family. When police recovered her body, they confirmed Regina Prem was the killer's 8th victim to date. The discovery put them no closer to stopping the killer. Vienna, October 22, 1991. Austrian authorities questioned Unterweger for the first time. With no hard evidence to connect him to the crimes, they hoped for a confession. He admitted to consorting with prostitutes for his writing assignments and for sex. But he denied knowing the victims. Although his alibis were weak, investigators were forced to release him. Their evidence was merely circumstantial, and his public support was growing. But Mueller and Geiger still believed Unterweger was a strong suspect and continued digging into his past. They tracked down the car Jack drove when he was first released from prison. But it had been a year since he sold it, and the likelihood of finding any usable evidence was slim. The team uncovered little, except a hair fragment.
It's good. It's good.
Although it was a long shot, investigators sent the hair fragment to the University of Bern for analysis. enough of the hair root remained for lab technicians to extract a DNA sequence. That sequence was compared to those of the victims. Of the 8 women slain, the DNA from the hair matched the earliest victim from Prague, Blanka Bokova, killed in September 1990. It was a breakthrough. But that only proved the woman was in the car when Jack owned it. Investigators needed stronger evidence. Now back at police headquarters, Geiger questioned Austrian prostitutes. They recognized Unterweger as a regular customer who insisted they wear handcuffs during sex. More importantly, one recalled seeing him approach her friend, Heide Marie Hammerer, the first victim discovered in Bregenz. She also remembered he wore a brown leather jacket on that night. On the strength of this identification and the hair fragment found in his car, Geiger obtained a warrant to search Unterweger's apartment.
Jack Unterweger? Polizei!
When the police arrived, Unterweger was nowhere to be found. They took away clothing, including a brown leather jacket for forensic examination. Then one of the detectives discovered some receipts in a trash can. They were from a seafood restaurant in Malibu, California, dated 9 months earlier. Jack Unterweger had been to the United States. But the apartment search yielded less than the investigators had hoped. They found no hard evidence that directly tied Unterweger to the slayings. Since their case was still too weak to issue an arrest warrant, the investigation stalled. Jack Unterweger was still one step ahead. To stop him, Geiger needed help from those more experienced with catching serial killers. He needed the FBI. The Austrian investigators visited the U.S. Embassy. They met with legal attaché Julianne Slisko, an FBI agent stationed in Vienna.
I'm hoping you could help us with the FBI.
Slisko called the criminal profiling unit in Quantico, Virginia.
Hi, Agent McCrary.
She was patched through to Special Agent Greg McCrary.
Killings here in Austria.
Now retired, McCrary spent the last 10 of his 25 years in the FBI, pioneering the science of profiling.
The Austrians contacted the FBI because they were trying to tap into our experience of dealing with serial homicide investigations. This was the first serial murder investigation in modern history in Austria.
McCrary agreed to assist the Austrians. He would help them determine if one perpetrator could have committed all the murders. When Geiger told Slisko that Unterweger had traveled to L.A. the previous summer, she authorized a telex to be sent to California to inform local authorities. Over the next several days, Geiger and Mueller prepared for their trip to the FBI, packing crime scene reports, autopsy protocols, and photos. Then they received a call from L.A. detective Fred Miller. Miller had received their telex and said that California had suffered a similar pattern of killings during the prior summer. Now investigators turned their attention to L.A., 6,000 miles away, in the hunt for the Austrian serial killer. By the fall of 1991, 8 women had been found dead in Central Europe. The prime suspect was Austrian celebrity writer Jack Unterweger. But little forensic evidence tied him to the crimes. And the public believed the police were pursuing an innocent man. An FBI telex from Vienna to California caught the attention of Los Angeles detective Fred Miller. He and his partner, Jim Harper, had been working for months on a series of unsolved murders. In style and pattern, the LA crimes resembled the ones that Unterweger was suspected of in Austria.
This immediately lit the fires, and it was just unbelievable to go all these 8 months and without the suspect turning up or another murder. This was quite a boost to the investigation.
The American and Austrian investigators compared notes. The cases were clearly similar. The victims were prostitutes. All had been strangled using intimate apparel, and all the bodies were left in remote locations. Now, Miller and Harper began to reconstruct Unterweger's visit to California. They checked the airlines, car rental agencies, and hotel logs. From these, they created a timeline of his movements.
We learned that he came to Los Angeles in June of '91 on vacation, right around June the 2nd or 3rd, and that he left around the 17th of July.
In the summer of 1990, Unterweger visited LAPD headquarters.
And I'm a journalist, and I am interested.
He strolled into the public relations office, presented his press credentials, and signed up for the Ride-Along program.
And the Austrian police.
This program allows civilians to tag along with police in their cruisers as they patrol the city.
Tonight at 8:30
As all Jack's credentials were in order, the request was accepted.
Jack Unterweger.
Unterweger claimed he was writing a German magazine story, contrasting American and European prostitution. He asked to be shown where the city's prostitutes hung out. The officers introduced him to the seedier areas of Los Angeles. Detective Jim Harper explains.
I mean, if you come to a city as big as Los Angeles, you know, prostitutes don't hang out everywhere. You gotta know where they hang out. What better way to do that than get a ride along with the police department?
Witnesses last saw 21-year-old Shannon Exley in the vicinity of 7th Street and Main Street.
What's that you saying?
She had been working the streets since she'd run away from home at 16. Her life ended on June 20th, 1991. Her nude body was found with her bra wrapped around her neck. Marks on her feet told investigators she had already been strangled when she was dragged some 50 feet to where she was found.
The lacerations across her neck.
Medical technicians were able to isolate DNA sequences from the semen of 7 men. But LA detectives had no suspects with whom they could compare the samples. 10 days later, investigators discovered a second prostitute, Irene Rodriguez. She was found behind a tractor trailer, only 1.5 miles from where Exley's body had been dumped. Both women had been strangled with their bras, and both were last seen in the vicinity of 7th and Main Street. The detectives discovered that Unterweger was living nearby.
We learned that he stayed at the Cecil Hotel, which is located at 643 South Main, which is right on the corner of 7th and Main Street, and that's the location where, close proximity where both our victims were last seen.
A third victim, Sherry Long, was found near Malibu less than 2 weeks later. Once again, Unterweger was staying at a hotel in the vicinity Long was last seen. Around her neck, her bra was tied tightly. Detective Jim Harper remembers the unique method of strangulation.
The way the bras were tied around their neck was nothing that I had seen before. It looked to me it took a lot of intricate time to really take time with the victim and put it around their necks and tie it.
Los Angeles criminalist Lynn Harold compared the knots to see if there was a pattern in the way each had been made and tied.
In order for the knots to be made,
The wearing apparel had to be dismantled in some form. It's not like the bras were just taken and tied in a square knot, but they were stripped of the elastic always on the left side. And if 3 people randomly went out and strangled 3 people, it is extremely unlikely that all 3 of them would come up with this same scenario.
Now Geiger and Mueller added the information from the Los Angeles murders to their own case and headed to Virginia. They hoped that the FBI could determine whether one man had indeed killed all 11 women. Back in Austria, Jack Unterweger maintained a high profile. The celebrity journalist continued to publish his articles and appeared on television to talk about the murders. He told audiences that the Austrian police were inept at finding the real killer and had singled him out as a scapegoat. Unterweger claimed that the authorities were determined to send him back to prison, even if that meant framing him for the grisly crimes. Unterweger remained popular with the public at large and in the nightclubs where he was a regular. To his fans, and especially women, he was still charming. He boasted the police had no evidence, only theories. And they would never be able to send him back to prison. In August 1992, Austrian detectives arrived at Quantico, Virginia. They needed an experienced FBI profiler to help them capture the serial killer that had left 11 women dead in Central Europe and California. The Austrians came with 12 boxes of evidence. Special Agent Greg McCrary refused to look at any information on the prime suspect, Jack Unterweger. He didn't want any preconceived notions to interfere with his analysis. Instead, McCrary wanted to focus on the victims.
I wanted all the case materials on all of the homicides, victimology, a lot about the victims and their background, their history, the method and manner of death, autopsy reports, crime scene photos, everything that was available from an investigative point of view. What we didn't want is suspect information. We just wanted to take an objective look at all of the cases to see what we thought, if they might be related or not, and the type of offender that we thought might be most probably involved in committing these crimes.
Let's get to work.
McCrary did not presuppose that the crimes were linked. He examined the similarities among the cases to see if they were unusual enough to have been committed by one perpetrator. He began to look for a behavioral thumbprint, a criminal signature in each of the murders.
A signature crime analysis is an assessment of the behavioral aspects of the crime, which can in some cases be a single event, but more often it's a constellation of behaviors that are consistent from crime to crime to crime. And this allows us to link crimes together behaviorally based on the behavior of the offender.
Yes.
McCrary looked for patterns. He examined everything known about the 11 women. How similar were their lifestyles? Almost all the women were prostitutes, except for the first woman slain in Prague.
Mr. McCrary, this is a map of Vienna.
A companion last saw Blanka Bokova on September 14, 1990, leaving a bar in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Bokova worked as a sales clerk at a butcher shop, but was known to trade sex for favors. Her body was left on the bank of the Vltava River in a stretch of woods near Bokova's home. The killer had strangled her with her own nylon stockings. He left her naked, covered with sticks and twigs. He threw her clothes and identification in the river.
Right.
The first victim Austrian police found had been a registered prostitute for 10 years, Heide Marie Hammerer. In the early part of her career, she had suffered several violent attacks from customers, so she was known to be cautious. Hammerer was last seen outside a parking garage on December 5, 1990. Like the first 5 victims, Hammerer was found in the woods close to water. They all had restraint bruises on their arms and wrists. And autopsies found no semen on any of the European victims. To the profiler, this suggested that the killer struck out of impotence. He was terribly insecure about his masculinity. When he could not perform after being sexually stimulated, the killer lashed out in anger. He strangled the women he blamed for shaming him. Then he left their bodies in humiliating positions. Next, they focused on the LA murder victims. Did they fit the pattern that had been established in Europe? Shannon Exley was found face down in a grassy area near a freeway exit. She was nude except for a t-shirt and a pair of socks. She had been dragged 50 feet from the pavement to the location where she was discovered, after being strangled with her brassiere. Again, this crime, like the others in LA and Europe, showed the killer had preferences and that the violence itself had become erotic to him.
It became clear that there was a pattern to these homicides. That there was sort of a ritualistic behavior that occurred in each of these crime scenes. Each woman was similar in nature, either a prostitute or a woman who traded sex for favors. They were on the street when they were contacted, when they were picked up, usually very surreptitiously. No one really saw these women get into a car. They were transported out to an area. They were murdered, ligature strangled with an article of their own clothing, disposed in a similar manner in an outdoor setting, absence of sexual assault.
All right, roughly from where she was last
After a week, the study of the victimology convinced McCrary that there had indeed been only one killer behind the 11 homicides. The FBI agent and the Austrian detective spent the following week drawing up a profile of the assailant. The evidence suggested the killer had a good degree of mobility. He was older, intelligent, sophisticated, and an organized offender. To criminal psychologist Tom Mueller, this described Jack Unterweger.
I would say Jack was a very, very good example for a typical type of organized offender, and I would say he was a typical example for a natural psychologist. He was able to understand the needs of other people. He was able to come close to other people, to listen to other people, and then to manipulate them.
But the geography worked against the theory that there was one killer. The murders had occurred in Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Los Angeles. With minor exceptions, most serial killers stay regional and prey within a comfort zone. But enough time had elapsed between the slayings to permit one culprit to move around. Now the profiler compared Unterweger's travels to the chronology of the murders.
And when I overlaid Jack Unterweger's timeline on the timeline of the crimes, they fit perfectly. And that was really a dawning moment, the aha moment, the moment that's really exciting in analysis like this, because now you have a suspect whose movements correlate perfectly with each of the homicides, as well as his prior homicide that he had been convicted for, bearing a lot of similarities to these homicides. We can put him in each place at each time these crimes occurred. And either Jack Unterweger was the unluckiest man in the world to have been there, or he was an excellent suspect.
In Austria, Unterweger continued to enjoy his freedom and notoriety. Some women still found him appealing, even though the former convict was a prime murder suspect. This perplexed Detective Fred Miller.
One of the interesting facets of Jack Unterweger was that he could carry on a normal relationship with a female and still be this cruel and murder other females.
High school student Bianca Mrak was one of those that fell under his charm. The impressionable 18-year-old met Unterweger in a wine bar where she worked as a waitress. She was flattered by the attention from the celebrity writer. He told her he was tiring of all the publicity in Austria and might leave the country, maybe to Switzerland. She agreed to go with him wherever he went. August 1992. Agent Greg McCrary of the FBI worked with Austrian detectives to solve a series of 11 murders. 8 women were killed in Central Europe, 3 more in Los Angeles. All circumstantial evidence pointed to celebrity journalist Jack Unterweger as the culprit. Then they received a phone call from the University of Bern. Austrian lab technicians had completed the fiber analysis of clothing confiscated from Unterweger's apartment weeks before. The inspection had yielded results. Fibers from the lining of the brown leather jacket matched those on the body of Heide Marie Hammerer, the first prostitute found. It was hard forensic evidence that tied Unterweger to one of the victims. But investigators wanted to conclusively link the suspect to all the victims. The FBI had another tool that could do just that, VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. The computer database holds the details of 10,000 solved and unsolved U.S. homicides. A programmer inputted the particulars of the European and Los Angeles cases. Details of the victims, their manner of death, locations where they disappeared, and where they were found were all fed into the computer. McCrary ordered an extensive breakdown, a multi-dimensional search with 15 cross-criteria that could show if the crimes were connected. 48 hours later, the detectives were called back to the VICAP room to hear the answer. The results were stunning. The computer statistically linked all 11 slayings. Jack Unterweger was the killer. The FBI had given the Austrians solid proof for their case. But Unterweger was still at large. The Austrian detectives immediately returned to Vienna. Armed with the FBI profile, authorities issued an arrest warrant for Johann Jack Unterweger. Again, the police descended upon the writer's residence. But Jack was gone. He had abandoned his flat. Geiger called his office and ordered his team to check all of Austria's ports of exit. Within hours, all train stations and airports were canvassed. But they found no sign of Unterweger. The serial killer was gone. Unterweger had already fled with Bianca Mrak beyond the reach of Austrian authorities.
Jack Unterweger is a very good representative of an intelligent psychopath. He became an award-winning author and playwright, but psychopaths are very, very manipulative, and they have a supreme ability to con other people.
Hello? Hello? Ja. Ja, ich bin hier.
On a stop in Paris, Jack called into television shows and protested his innocence. He said his flight was not an admission of guilt, but an attempt to evade a frame-up by the police. He promised to return to Austria and answer all questions if the arrest warrant was withdrawn. Despite his media appearances, the Austrian police had no idea where Unterweger was hiding. In Vienna, investigators interviewed Unterweger's friends. They were unfazed by the fact that he had been indicted for multiple murders. They said that Jack had run off for a holiday in America with Bianca Marak, a former waitress from the wine bar. Bianca was known to live with her mother, so Geiger paid a visit to Mrs. Marak.
Mit wem?
She acknowledged that she had been in contact with the fugitive couple, sending them money via wire transfers. They were in New York and heading down to Florida. Geiger told her to contact him if her daughter called again.
Okay, is ze komen?
Mrs. Marak agreed.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Just days later, she got a call from Miami. Her daughter needed more money. Mrs. Marak promptly informed the Austrian police. U.S. Marshals were waiting at the Western Union. The Marshals ID'd the couple as they drove up.
U.S. Marshals, you're under arrest! U.S. Marshals, you're under arrest!
Unterweger was quickly apprehended. He was jailed in Miami to await extradition. Both the nation of Austria and the state of California wanted to prosecute him. LAPD Detective Fred Miller began conferring with his Austrian counterparts.
After Jack's arrest in Miami, we dealt almost on a daily schedule with the Austrian authorities, trying to put the information they had on their murders together with the information on the California murders. The Austrian authorities made trips to Los Angeles. They provided us with whatever materials we needed, photographs of the crime scenes, information on the victims, information on Jack.
2 miles.
The Austrians wanted to prosecute Unterweger in their court for all 11 murders. But they knew that would be difficult. The Austrian public perceived Jack as a celebrity. Detectives would have to convince them that Jack's private evil side was the reality. Special Agent Greg McCrary explains.
What's interesting with Jack, if you look at different pictures from different parts of his life, many times he's nattily attired with a bow tie and has this almost young, innocent-looking face. But then if you see him with his shirt off and you look at these really diabolical, involved prison tattoos that are typical of the more violent psychopathic offenders you have in prison, you see the dichotomy between Jack's outward appearance and the inner psychopathology becomes more apparent.
I've always tried to get
The LAPD detectives obtained a search warrant for tissue samples from the prisoner. In Miami, a technician drew blood, took hair samples and swabs of saliva for DNA testing. The samples were sent back to a Los Angeles lab for analysis. His DNA matched that found in the semen from Shannon Exley. But Exley's body contained semen from 6 other men, and there was no sexual discharge found in the other 2 LA prostitutes. Jack Unterweger worried that he would be transferred to California, where a death penalty was possible. He did not want to die in the gas chamber. But if he went back to Austria, he could be tried for the crimes on both continents. Criminal psychologist Tom Mueller explains.
If an Austrian citizen is committing a crime wherever in the world, the Austrian law is responsible for that guy. So the American authorities gave the clearance to bring Mr. Unterweger here back to Austria.
But Unterweger could delay this by fighting extradition.
How are we going to Austria? You know, Jack.
LA detectives pressured him. They assured Unterweger that he would be found guilty in California and reminded him of the state's death penalty. Fearing the gas chamber, he agreed to deportation.
You'll sign the extradition.
Despite the evidence, he still enjoyed popular support at home.
Let's go.
And Unterweger believed he could persuade a jury that the authorities were wrong. But the Austrians were betting on the FBI profile. When Jack Unterweger returned to his native Austria, he faced 11 counts of murder. 7 women were killed on Austrian soil, but the laws of the Central European country allow its citizens to be tried for crimes committed anywhere in the world. The murder indictment had done little to diminish the writer's support in the media. As he sat in jail awaiting trial, Jack continued to lobby the press that the police had framed him. His case saturated the news. In this highly charged environment, Austrian prosecutors prepared for trial. If they wanted to win, they had to present an airtight case. LAPD detective Jim Harper journeyed to Vienna for the trial.
The OJ case here in LA is the only thing I can kind of equate it to. It was that big over there. It was all over the newspapers, headlines. I mean, and when we came into this town to testify, it was a big deal. We were all over the front page of the paper, the whole deal.
The trial was held before a 3-judge tribunal. The prosecution argued their case with minimal physical evidence. They were counting on Agent McCrary's behavioral profile.
Could you say why there's so many different places?
So it became increasingly important to link these crimes together behaviorally. That really was the only way that Jack could be linked to this entire series of crimes. So that became the critical component in the prosecution of Jack, and where we were most able to assist the Austrian authorities.
Take them to a different spot.
McCrary related to the judges what he had deduced at Quantico. The killer always chose prostitutes, or those who traded sex for favors. He was criminally sophisticated, older, at least in his late 30s. He wasn't panicky nor disorganized. He possessed inner rage, but it was very controlled. The victims had bruises on their wrists as if they had been restrained with handcuffs. McCrary was convinced Unterweger would ask the prostitutes to wear them to fulfill his sexual fantasy. But it was about control. The killer wanted their hands secured to prevent them from resisting.
The bodies were found
McCrary's testimony linked the victims together.
to where they were laid.
Across 2 continents, the trail of deaths followed Jack Unterweger. Where he went, women died. While he visited Los Angeles, 3 prostitutes were murdered, and their slayings mimicked those in Europe. Shannon Exley and the other 2 American women were strangled to death. The offender used their brassieres as ligatures. And Unterweger tied the knots on the ligatures in exactly the same way as he had on the ones in Europe. McCrary pointed out that the probability was infinitesimal that more than one killer committed the crimes.
What are the chances that more than one offender would be not only choosing to ligature strangle a victim with an article of her own clothing, but he would tie the knots in exactly the same way? Very, very remote chance that we've had different offenders committing the crime in that manner.
But the defense argued there was a difference. The victims in Los Angeles had been strangled with their brassieres, and women in Europe had been strangled with their pantyhose. But McCrary countered that European prostitutes do not wear brassieres. What mattered to the killer was that he used an intimate article of the victim's clothing.
The prostitutes, I'm sure that he was much more hurried.
LA criminalist Lynn Harold was asked to compare the knots from the pantyhose to those from the bras.
In the case of the pantyhose, you had one leg The second leg was double backed on itself and used as the third segment for the weaving or braiding, in a manner extremely similar to one of the bra cases where the two pieces of elastic formed two segments and the left strap was pulled through as the third braid.
In all, the trial lasted 2.5 months. On June 28, 1994, a jury in Graz, Austria, found Johann Jack Unterweger guilty of 9 of the murders. The remaining victims were found too badly decomposed to convict Unterweger beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict meant life in prison to a man who swore he would never spend another day behind bars. And he never did. Unterweger strangled himself with a nylon cord stripped from his uniform.
We normally think of suicide as coming from depression or someone who feels shame or guilt or remorseful in some way. This is not at all what was going on when Jack committed suicide. More psychopathic offenders like Jack do it to exert control. And it's the last great defiant act that he exercised to wrest control of this situation away from the government, away from the authorities. He would not allow himself to be imprisoned for the rest of his life.
Jack Unterweger proved that serial killers are not just an American phenomenon. European law enforcement agencies realized that to fight criminals of this sort, they would have to follow the FBI's example.
What we learned out of their case was that in Austria and even in Europe, we didn't have a similar system like VICAP. Violent Crime Apprehension Program. The Criminal Psychology Service tried to get a similar system here to Austria, and therefore we can work with all sex crime cases and homicide cases.
Now, thanks to the lead of the FBI, many countries have adopted profiling and a computerized criminal database in the hopes that open borders and conflicting jurisdictions will no longer allow these predators to escape justice.